Icebreaker is a new for 2022 Premier Rides multi-launch coaster. More specifically, it's a Premier Skyrocket. It has 2 forwards launches, 2 backwards launches, and it was meant to be a family coaster. A nice stepping stone from Grover to Mako. However, it was less of a family coaster than expected, creating a higher height requirement, making it no longer a family coaster. So what do I think of this coaster that I finally got to ride after it being delayed a couple of years? Do I think it's a family coaster or a thrill coaster? Find out in today's review. Icebreaker is located at SeaWorld Orlando in Orlando, Florida. After you get into the park, you can find it by walking right of the SeaWorld sign and work your way to the bridge which leads you to Icebreaker. It's separated from the rest of the park. It's not the easiest ride to get to. Mako, Manta, Kraken are on one side of the park, and then Icebreaker just sits alone. It has your typical Premier trains. It has 3 cars, 3 rows each for a total of 9 rows and 2 seats per row, so it has a capacity of 18 riders per train. As far as the restraints themselves, I'll discuss them more later, but it has the Premier lap bars, which I'm not a fan of. They're really tight. It also has comfort collars, which are far from your chest, so they don't really affect anything at all. I rode in rows 3, 5, and 9. I would actually say row 5 was my favorite because it mixed what's good about the front and back rows, which I thought was very interesting, although sometimes that's how it works. Now let's get into the layout a little bit. After the transfer track, you start off with the launch backwards. It's alright, but nothing too crazy. Then comes the first forwards launch, which is pretty solid, but again, nothing insane. The airtime hill before the top hat does give some decent airtime though. Then comes the second backwards launch, which leads into the spike and the junior scorpion tail. At least towards the back, this is a fantastic element. It's my favorite part of the ride. You get a nice floaty sensation, good butterflies on it. Then you'll head into the fourth and final launch in total, and the second forwards launch, which isn't too intense but gives some really nice airtime before the top hat. This hill gives weak ejector from my experience. Then comes the top hat, which does give some very good airtime. I feel like it would be better though with better restraints, and that goes for the whole ride. The airtime is really good, I'd say. It's probably ejector, but it's pretty restrictive. Not painful like Tigers, but restrictive. After that is the double down. This is a couple nice hills back to back. They give pretty decent airtime. You might come out of your seat on them. Then comes what they're calling the Sidewinder turn. I actually really enjoyed this element. You get some nice laterals while getting some pretty decent airtime. Next up is the sideways camelback, as they're saying, and again some solid sideways floater airtime. Nothing crazy, but solid. Then comes what I'm personally calling the mini snap. It looks like a snap, but it's not, taking at a blazing fast speed, and it doesn't really do anything. And finally is the hill before the brakes, which gives you a decent airtime pop before popping into the final brake run. It's a fairly short ride, and it really dies down in the second half, but it's not bad by any means. For more on the elements, I will be ranking every element on Icebreaker in the next video, so stay tuned for that. Let's get into the categories. Certain categories are worth more based on how important I think each category is for Icebreaker in particular. For airtime, Icebreaker deserves a respectable 7.5 out of 10. It has a few ejector moments, including the hill before the top hat and the top hat, as well as some nice floater moments, including the hill before the spike, the double down, the sidewinder turn, and the sideways camelback. The spike is a little floaty as well, but the spike is mainly good for the butterflies category. The best airtime moment on the ride is the top hat. However, it could give even better airtime with better restraints. If this ride had Velocicoaster restraints, for example, this ride would definitely be better. But the airtime is there on this ride. It's definitely good for a marketed family coaster. I wouldn't consider it a good airtime focused coaster, but it also isn't bad if you're looking for some airtime. I'll say it does have the strongest airtime moment in the park, so I'll give it that. Pacing gets a 7 out of 9 for Icebreaker. Not really sure what to say about it. It doesn't have bad pacing, but it's not the best. It slows down a little bit at the end, but not too bad. It still flies for a marketed family coaster, and that's the thing you gotta remember. This thing was marketed as a family coaster, so every good thing it does is taken up a tier. So it's got very good pacing for what it's worth. This category isn't too important other than adding to the atmosphere of the ride. On the launch section, the water will be on your right, the pathway and station will be on your left. It has better scenery than a lot of coasters out there, just for having the water. That's why I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. It isn't an insanely beautiful setting, but it is pretty good. And something weird that I like is non-rider interaction. That's one of the things I like about Fury 325. And the non-rider interaction is great on the spike, so that adds to the setting to me, even if it would hurt most people's rating of the setting. Icebreaker doesn't have tons in terms of positive G-forces. It's not terrible, but it's not good either. The main force you'll get is negative G-forces, which are good, but that has its own category. This isn't a coaster that I'd see myself grading out on. You'd have to be really weak or really young for that. The launches aren't forceless, I wouldn't say, but again, they're not anything crazy. They get you up to speed, and they're good for a marketed family coaster. I'll give Icebreaker a 3.5 out of 7 for intensity. An alright 50% right there. For butterflies, I'll give Icebreaker a 5.5 out of 7. It has one moment of them, and that is the spike. It's a pretty good moment, nice floating moment that I was hoping to get them on, and it delivered with that. It's the reason it's my favorite element on the ride. The butterflies category for this ride is worth 7, not as high as some other rides, because honestly, Icebreaker does what it's meant to do. It has some flaws, but I'll talk about that later. Not having butterflies wouldn't be as much of a flaw as comfortability, duration, airtime, and others, but again, I'll get into that later. I went into this ride worrying that I might dislike it because of the very tight restraints I knew it had. I've experienced these before on the likes of Tigress, Skyrocket, and Tempesto, and Tigress is the only one I didn't like the restraints for. I was worried this was a Florida thing or something, but I was happy to find out that these restraints are tolerable. They're not good at all, but they're tolerable. The comfort collars don't do anything except for slightly touch you on the top hat. The lap bars are really the fault of the restraints. They don't hurt like Tigress, but you don't get very much room, and it's hard to get airtime because of that. You can feel that you're being pushed up, but your body really isn't because of these restraints. They're not the worst I've experienced, though. Again, they're tolerable. So comfort gets a 5 out of 8. For the final category, we have duration. This ride, launch to brakes, is about 55 seconds long, give or take. And to me, it feels shorter than that. I guess because the elements aren't insanely crazy, but it feels kind of short. Another contributor could be the fact that it has 2 forwards and backwards launches that feel kind of similar, so they don't stand out, and it makes the ride feel shorter. But with that being said, it's not too short of a ride either. It's average, I'd say, for duration, but I don't know. Don't expect a crazy long ride. You won't get that. I'll give Icebreaker a 5.5 out of 8 for duration. So, for our final score, Icebreaker gets 38 out of 54, which equates to a 7 out of 10, or 70% of the points possible. And for a personal score, I agree. I also give Icebreaker a 7 out of 10 for a personal score. It's a good ride, not amazing, but above average. So let's answer this question. Is it a family coaster? And I would have to say yes, it is. However, it has some of the best airtime for a family coaster out there. I still consider it a family coaster because of the lack of intensity, stats, and it doesn't have amazing speed towards the end. To me, this ride feels the most similar to Copperhead Strike at Carowinds. Icebreaker is like Copperhead Strike without inversions in a way. Both have pretty forceless launches, both have less than amazing restraints, and both have some good ejector moments. I actually call Copperhead a borderline family coaster. I think kids could handle that ride, just from off-ride, maybe not. So, of course, I do think Icebreaker is a family coaster. Anyone in the family could enjoy the ride, assuming you don't think the restraints are too restrictive. So, I think that's going to wrap up my Icebreaker review. Do I recommend you go out of your way to ride this coaster? I would definitely say go for it, since Ayungwazi is just over an hour away. This is definitely good credit to pick up. It's a fun family coaster. I enjoyed it. So thank you for watching. Please share the video, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you later.